Okay. So members are welcome to a meeting of the Northern Ireland Assembly's Justice Committee. The proceedings are being recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and also online. If I can just remind members to make sure that their mobile devices are on airplane mode and that they're not going to ring during the meeting, and if you can keep your telephones away from the microphones so that there isn't any electronic interference with them. Okay, we're going to have two oral evidence sessions today, members. They're both going to be recorded by Hansard. If members are content that Hansard carries out that recording, all agreed? Agreed. Item 5, committee membership. The membership of the committee is as outlined on page 34 of the meeting pack. And again, all members are welcome to the Justice Committee. Item 6 is declaration of members' interests. Again, for members' benefit, each member of the committee's registry, their entry into the register of interests is available for members. If members need to add to that, if they can do that with the Clerk of Standards. But there is also a specific paper just for members to look at in the meeting pack. Obviously, it requires members to declare any interests that they have whenever there are proceedings taking place of the Justice Committee, and there's just a form of wording that needs to be read out specifically around this. Standing Order 69.5 states that a member who has A, a financial interest in any matter, or B, a relevant interest in the matter, must declare that interest before taking part in any proceedings of the Assembly relating to that matter. In particular, there is a requirement to declare any interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence the member's approach to the matter under consideration. Proceedings of the Assembly includes meetings of this committee. So, as this is the first meeting of the committee, members should declare any financial or other interests which relate to the remit of the committee or which are likely to be relevant to a substantial part of its work, and that these are drawn to the attention of the committee. And it should also be noted that failure to register and or declare an interest may be an offence under Section 43 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. So if members have any interests that they wish to declare in respect of the committee, they can do so. Obviously, on a case-by-case basis, when things come in, there may be an issue that members at that point feel that they need to declare a particular interest in. Then there will be an opportunity to do that at every meeting of the Justice Committee as we deal with that. But if members need to add anything more than what is already in front of them in respect of their own register of interests, then now's the time to do it. If not, then we're content with the interests as currently declared in members' interests. Okay, item 7, just committee procedures. Again, the meeting pack at pages 40 to 59 highlight the procedures of the committee. It gives the guidance to the powers and the operation of statutory committees for chairman and its members. There's a guide to the role for committee chairman. There's a guide for members in respect of the role and functions of the committee office. Within these papers on pages 45 and 49, if I can just draw members' particular attention to the matter of parliamentary privilege and the laws in respect of sub judice. Under Section 50 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998, for the purposes of the law of defamation, absolute privilege applies equally to the making of a statement in proceedings of the Assembly and the publication of a statement under the Assembly's authority. This privilege also extends to meetings of this committee. But members should note that it cannot be assumed that a press release agreed by the committee is covered by Assembly privilege, and privilege does not extend to press conferences or statements that are made to the press. Okay, so that's in terms of privilege. We have the exact same privilege as exists in the Assembly chamber as it does to the proceedings of this committee. In terms of the rules around sub judice, just to be aware of potential problems that can be associated with discussing a matter that is sub judice. That is a matter which is being or about to be considered by a court. the sub judice rule required by Section 41 and Schedule 6 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998 is contained within Standing Order 73, and it provides that any matters in respect of which legal proceedings are active should not be referred to in committee proceedings, except to the extent permitted by the committee chairman. In such cases, the matter awaiting adjudication should not be prejudiced by comment in a public session of a committee meeting. So members can note the guidance in respect of this. You can get further clarity from the clerk. As these issues arise, I'll do my best to keep members right. Bear with me, as I will always err on the side of caution in respect of these matters, and if necessary, I will insist that members stop any comments that I feel may be at risk of being sub judice. But we'll obviously deal with that as things arise. Item 8 is guidance on timescales for interaction between the committees and the department. Again, this committee has always had a good relationship with the Department for Justice, but there are papers that just highlight the agreed working arrangements that were reached by the Assembly Chairperson's Liaison Group, and they're there for members' guidance. Item 9 is subordinate legislation, delegation of technical scrutiny to the examiner of statutory rules. Again, it's within the meeting packet, pages 66 to 68. It's normal practice for a committee to delegate responsibility for the technical scrutiny of statutory rules to the examiner of statutory rules, who is an officer of this Assembly, and to authorise her to report her findings to the committee, the Assembly and the Department. By delegating authority for the technical examination of the rule to the examiner, the committee then can focus on the merits and the policy aspects of the rules. So if members are content and agree that the Committee for Justice resolves under Standing Order 43 to delegate to the examiner of statutory rules the technical scrutiny of statutory rules referred to the committee under the above mentioned standing order, the committee further resolves that in carrying out this function, the examiner shall be authorised to report her technical findings on each statutory rule to the Assembly and to the relevant department, as well as to the committee itself, and to publish her report. Members agreed? Agreed. Okay, item 10 is the Committee for Justice Legacy Reports. It's there just for members' information. There was the Legacy Report of the 2011 to 16 Justice Committee. It set out the key activities, outputs and achievements of that particular session of the Assembly Committee. There will be a paper that will be provided by the clerk of this committee giving a summary of the work that the Justice Committee carried out during that short time frame of 2016 to 17. Obviously that legacy report wouldn't have been agreed by the committee at the time, given the circumstances in which the duration of it ended, but the clerk will provide a summary of what that committee was working on in order to help assist members. So there's obviously going to be work in the legacy report that this committee will want to look at, to follow up on, and that I'm sure members will want to explore in the weeks and months ahead. So it's there for members' information, and obviously if there are issues arising from that, we'll be able to look into those in the time ahead. So the information is just there for members to note. If members are content, we'll do that. Okay, item 11. Peter, if you want to come forward. So members, we've got obviously the Permanent Secretary with us here today, who's going to provide an overview of the Department of Justice. The Department has helpfully provided the first day brief that was given to the Minister on her first day in office, and it sets out the structure and the budget, and it provides background information on the various directorates and agencies and the key work streams of the department. So for members' benefit, pages 94 to 138 of your meeting pack has the relevant information. So let me welcome Peter May, the Permanent Secretary of the Department, here to the meeting. You're very welcome, and obviously we're pleased that you've made yourself available for our first meeting of the committee. And just to advise that the session will be recorded by Hansard. So I'm going to hand over to you, Peter, at this stage to give us a general overview, and then I've no doubt members will want to get into some questions. Thank you, Peter.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the invitation to attend the committee's first meeting. I know the Minister's spoken to you, and the committee will be hearing from her in due course about her future policy direction. Following on from the comments I heard you make in the business immediately prior to this, I'd like to take this opportunity to assure both you and the committee as a whole that the department looks forward to its engagements and will do all it can to build a positive and constructive working relationship, as I believe has been the case previously. So today I'm going to set out the structure of the department, the resources available to it, and to say something about some of the significant issues facing the department currently. I know subsequently you'll be hearing from each of the directors in the department today and at subsequent meetings, and they will give you specific and detailed briefing on their areas of responsibility, so I'm going to try not to steal their thunder. We've provided you with first day briefing material, an organisational chart and a breakdown of how the department's finances are distributed, and you'll have a chance later this month to meet the Minister to discuss her views on priorities in the policy agenda for the remainder of the mandate. In terms of the structure of the department, we've four core directorates: access to justice, safer communities, reducing offending and justice delivery. In addition, the department has 5 executive agencies: prisons, courts and tribunals, legal services, youth justice and forensic science, and is also responsible for 8 non-departmental public bodies of various sizes and natures, of which the PSNI is by far the largest. Currently, the department has 3,182 staff in post. That includes 1,274 prison grades, and around 90% of the DOJ staff work in the 5 agencies, specifically and particularly in the courts and prison services. So these staff are involved in important service delivery roles of varying types. In addition to departmental staff, the non-departmental public bodies of the department employ a further 10,075 people. I'll not go through them all, but 2 have by far the most. So there are 6,900 police officers and 2,500 police staff and 420 staff in the probation board, and that accounts for well over 95% of the total. So it's worth drawing out the Department of Justice is a people-centred organisation where a substantial amount of our budget is spent on staff costs, and of the remainder, a significant proportion is committed to expenditure on legal aid and compensation payments, over which the department has no direct control. In terms of budget, you'll receive a fuller briefing on the detail in due course, but the DOJ received an opening budget for 1920 of £1,077 million in resource. That doesn't include the technical budget for depreciation, and a capital budget of £76 million. Of that, the PSNI accounts for around 70% of the budget. After many years of austerity, we face financial challenges as every department does. While we anticipate being able to live within this year's budget, we look forward to contributing to the wider process to set the budget for next year and for future years beyond that. It's particularly important for us, as for many departments, that we move away from a one-year budget cycle to a longer-term resource planning approach, which will enable and encourage a longer-term view to be taken. As with other departments, it's certain there will be more soundly based cases for expenditure than there will be money to go round, and as a result, the Justice Minister will have to reach decisions about prioritisation. This year, we've largely rolled forward the budget from 2018-19, but there were a number of differences and additions. So we secured funding to meet a pressure in relation to employer pension contributions, which was in common with that faced by a range of departments. We received additional security funding for the PSNI from the Fresh Start Agreement and a contribution towards EU exit costs, which were primarily used to fund the recruitment of additional police officers by the PSNI. We also secured some funding for pressures faced during the year with a focus on frontline services and the commencement of the programme of legacy inquests, and have received some funding for the Tackling Paramilitarism programme. Our opening capital budget of £76 million has been prioritised in the following 3 areas: completion of a new accommodation block at Maghaberry Prison, key capital projects in PSNI, and the Courts and Tribunals Service digitisation and estates projects. Chair, I know you'll be speaking to the Minister directly in due course, but I just want to make a few comments on the key issues the Department has been dealing with and seeking to advance in the past 3 years. So the Department has continued to take forward the policy position of the outgoing Minister, Claire Sugden, and of the Executive's draft programme for government through the outcome delivery plans. The programme for government matters a lot to Justice because the big issues we face can only be resolved with help from others outside of Justice. We've provided reports through the Executive Office website summarising progress made against the key areas measured in the Outcome Deliveries Plan. That outcomes approach matters to the DOJ because it recognises the need to collaborate to solve big problems and the need for early intervention to address problems before they become crises. In particular, the Department has continued to focus on reducing offending and reoffending, both through the core services provided by the likes of the Prison Service, the Probation Board and the Youth Justice Agency, and through a suite of problem-solving justice pilots, which have, in a number of cases, demonstrated positive results on evaluation. The Department is accordingly working up plans for the consideration of the Justice Minister about how the most successful of these pilots might be rolled out more widely. A second area for focus has been the Tackling Paramilitarism programme, which is an executive-wide priority emerging from the Fresh Start Agreement and the subsequent report by the Independent Reporting Commission. The DOJ hosts the programme team, and while colleagues will talk to you in more detail about the progress that's been made so far, it's important that this continues to be a whole-of-government approach, because the justice system and its agencies can make a contribution, but can't resolve societal problems of this nature on their own. The third and final theme I would draw out has been the ongoing work in relation to transformation and modernisation. The Prisons 2020 programme is nearing the end of its second year of 3 years. In addition, there's a courts transformation programme which has been initiated, and 2019 saw the implementation of a new legal aid management system which digitised the approach to legal aid and which went live in July 2019. That system is now functioning effectively and is helping to speed up the payment of legal aid, as well as providing improved management information for evaluation. So taken together, that's a significant change agenda. Finally, as we look forward, the New Decade, New Approach document contains a number of areas where the Department of Justice will have a role in implementation. The Gillen Review of Serious Sexual Offending, which was commissioned by the Criminal Justice Board and which contains over 250 recommendations, is one of the most important areas. And taken together with Sir John Gillen's previous reviews of civil and family justice, these represent a major area of work for the Department. The agreement also specifically references a commitment to advancing legislation on committal reform, and we're finalising legislation to put to the Minister in the coming weeks for her consideration. The agreement references a number of justice-related areas. I've already mentioned tackling paramilitarism. I want briefly to touch on two further areas. One is the commitment to move to 7,500 officers. The speed of progress towards that target will be dependent on the budget outcome. And the agreement also references the British Government's commitment to bringing forward legislation to address legacy issues within 100 days. While the DOJ will not be obviously leading on that legislation, it's a matter for the Northern Ireland Office, we have a close and detailed interest because there are aspects of the legacy agreement reached at Stormont House which would fall to the Department of Justice to implement were the enabling legislation to be in place, principally the Historical Investigations Unit. I hope this introduction has given you a flavour of the way the Department is organised, its budgets, and some of the major issues we face. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Peter. That's a very helpful overview of where things are currently in the Department. Just on the financial pressures facing the Department, the documentation highlights a near £56 million pressure. Is that based on what the Department is currently providing, that going into 2021, that financial year has identified that you will need 56 million in essence to stand still?
Yes.
Okay. And when it comes then to the new decade, new approach, you mentioned the 7,500 police officers aspect of it. Has there yet been a costing exercise carried out by the Department as to what additional resources would be necessary to fund what is in the new deal, new decade, new approach?
So we're still going through some of that in detail, and some aspects of it, like the Historical Investigations Unit, would depend very much on what the legislation says that is brought forward. On police officers specifically, a couple of things to say. The first is you couldn't move straight to 7,500. There would have to be a period, a build period for that scale of recruitment. The estimate of the total additional cost is around 40 million for the additional officers that would be required to get to 7,500.
Okay, so that at the point in which it gets staffed to 7,500, that would require an additional 40 million on the current baseline?
Yes.
Okay. In terms then of the legacy issue, just to pick up on that, the document talked about Westminster introducing it, but getting the consent of the Assembly. Does the department know what that looks like?
No, we've not been given any indication what the thinking was behind that statement.
So, as it's currently in that, it says introduced in 100 days, but the consent of the Assembly needs to be sought. The department's not clear as to the mechanism by which that is going to be achieved?
No.
Okay. In terms of the legislation that the department is looking at, the first day brief mentions the domestic abuse bill. Obviously, that was a piece of work that the department had carried out just at the point at which the Assembly collapsed, and Westminster has subsequently sought to legislate for that. I note that within the first day brief, it would appear to indicate that officials' recommendation is that the Assembly should take that on. I just want to tease that out with you. Is that the position that the Minister has been advised, that the Assembly should take on this domestic abuse legislation?
There's a judgment call to be made about where best to legislate, but I think it makes sense for the Assembly to take the lead. And my understanding, based on initial conversations with the Minister, is that that's where she is minded to go as well. We have a piece. We had prepared legislation for inclusion in a domestic abuse bill at Westminster. That legislation was introduced in the summer and then fell when Theresa May's government fell. It was introduced again, I think, after Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, but then fell for the election. So that had been the path we'd looked at as a means of getting some important legislation onto the books. And we are now working with Legislative Council to prepare legislation suitable for introduction into an Assembly.
And has there been any initial opinion formed as to which route will expedite the matter in the most timely fashion? And secondly, there are other pieces of legislation that certainly I would be keen to pursue, for example, upskirting, and there are other aspects to this that if the Assembly were to legislate on it, is there ability within the broad parameters of the domestic abuse legislation that this Assembly could add additional offences into that?
So, in terms of speed, given I think it's likely that it would, if the Westminster timetable worked as they're currently envisaging, the legislation may well be passed more quickly at Westminster than in the Assembly. That's not certain. There's always lots of things that could change. The scope of the bill is properly, I think, a matter for legislative experts to comment on. Normally, scope does restrict, but I know that one of the other areas in which the Minister is considering legislation is stalking, and that would be that could well be a separate piece of legislation introduced in slightly slower time. We did a consultation last year on offences there, and it may well be that something like upskirting would fit better with something like that than domestic abuse. But I'm not an expert on the issues of scope.
Okay. And finally, just on the legislation aspect, is it the department's intention to introduce specific forms of legislation, or will there be an overarching criminal justice piece of law that a lot of issues will be included in?
So at the moment, that's a matter that we still need to discuss in more detail with the Minister. The two first pieces of legislation that would be ready pretty quickly are on domestic abuse and on committal reform, subject obviously to the Minister being content with the policy direction that's set out in those. And we think that a third piece of legislation on stalking could be introduced in the course of this year. We haven't yet got to the point of having a detailed discussion about legislation beyond that.
Okay. But certainly, as a point of principle, I prefer this place to be carrying out legislation. I think it is important, though, to bear in mind the view of the timeliness of trying to get laws in place, particularly around the domestic abuse legislation. But that said, in principle, I prefer this place to carry out that legislation. I think I would certainly like to hear a little bit more about the timeliness of it, but I do think this place can be more effective to make sure on these areas it is tailored more to Northern Ireland. A couple more points and then I'll bring other members in. The unexplained wealth orders, that's something that I've heard repeatedly from the police service and others about going after the criminal assets that people have gained. When will the department and will it bring forward the process for putting them in place?
So the Criminal Finances Act 2017 was passed at Westminster and enables unexplained wealth orders and a range of other opportunities in relation to serious and organised crime. The agreement reached was that there would need to be a legislative consent motion from the Assembly to enable those various provisions to be commenced. And we are currently looking at how best we can give effect to that. Because there are a range of different areas that are affected in that Criminal Finances Act, we need to think about whether to do them all at once or whether to do them one by one. Each of the arrangements requires further work to be done in terms of court rules, updates to the Proceeds of Crime Act, codes of practice, and so on. So we will be looking to do it as quickly as we can. We certainly anticipate that we will be able to do those various measures in the course of 2020.
Okay. And finally, on the Gillen review in respect of court proceedings around sexual offences, have we got an outline precisely of the kind of changes that require legislative effect? Has there been a view taken by the Minister if all of the recommendations are going to be taken forward, or are there some recommendations that the Minister doesn't agree with and may want to take a different approach? One issue that has been debated around this is to do with the anonymity debate of defendants, and I would be keen to know what the department and what the Minister's ultimately view is going to be around that recommendation.
So we haven't yet had the chance to go through all of the recommendations in detail with the Minister. I'm not able to comment specifically on her views on the point around anonymity, for example. What we have done is the Gillen review, in addition to legislation, has a huge number of recommendations that fall to a wide range of organisations, some of which are within the justice system, are statutory agencies, some of which are non-statutory agencies like the legal profession and the judiciary indeed. So we have been doing some work across the piece, and the Criminal Justice Board will be meeting next week, chaired by the Minister, to look at where we've got to against all of those recommendations. And within a matter of a relatively short period of time, we should be able to come to this committee and set out more fully the position. It is quite conceivable that there will be some recommendations that are either not agreed or very difficult to implement, and we need to take a view as to which ones will have the biggest impact, particularly on the complainants and those who are most affected by the current arrangements.
Okay, thank you. If I can just introduce then the Vice Chair of the committee, Linda Dillon.
Hi, Peter. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just have a quick question in relation to it's already been touched on here around the Gillen review. There is an implementation group, and I think they were to report to the parties in December, but then the election obviously. So have they done a report? Is there something they're sitting that we could have access to, that we could see as a committee, even I suppose, to get an idea of what the implementation group's ideas are going forward? I think just it would give us some idea of where the thinking is in terms of the department, and I think that I know that Justice Gillen actually met with the lady who's leading that. Is it Linda?
Linda Hamilton.
And he felt that she was a very positive influence in what needed to be done.
Yes.
But I think that you wouldn't want to lose whatever work has been done by the implementation group.
The implementation group, I mean, Linda is a member of the Department of Justice and will continue to work on the implementation of Gillen in the period ahead. As I said, we should be able to bring something to this committee very quickly. I think it's right that we first share with the Minister where we've got to, and indeed with the Criminal Justice Board. But the arrangements, the group has set out what has already been achieved and its proposal for what the priorities for the year ahead should be, which I think is the key aspects of all of this.
Okay, and I'm not asking you to go into detail on this because I don't think that, you know, this meeting's more of a, I suppose, an introductory and to get the bigger picture stuff. But at some stage in the future, could we also find out what is happening or what work has been done in relation to the issue in Fermanagh around the legacy abuse cases and the feeling of those victims that they haven't been, I suppose, listened to or haven't been very well treated by either the PSNI or the PPS. So I think if we can find out if anything is being done in terms of working with those victims, because it's not a, we're not talking about a specific case, I think we're talking about something up to almost 80 victims here. So I'm not asking you to deal with it now, okay. but if at some stage in the future we can get something in relation to that, because we probably need a bit of detail, and obviously we respect the issues around the, you know, there may be ongoing legal proceedings around.
Yeah, I suspect that this is an ongoing investigation, I think, at the moment. We can certainly inquire of the PSNI and the PPS as to the, you know, and see whether there's material they can share with the committee about the approach they've taken to those who have come forward.
It's more around the, you know, it is around the relationships and the ability of these victims to have faith in the process in both the PPS and the PSNI. So it's not the actual investigation
I understand
itself.
that.
It's more around what's been done to work with.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Linda. Big.
Thank you, Chair. Peter, thank you for your brief. I mean, some of the questions already have been fantastic and answered an awful lot of mine. Can I just raise a concern about the domestic abuse bill that the Chair raised, where it says that Westminster are going to bring forward that legislation in January, but we think it's better that we bring it through the Assembly here. And in principle, I agree with that. My only concern is I don't get what the time difference could be. For example, if you were to say to me that we could bring it in Westminster and we would have it on the statute in 2 months, but if we go through the Assembly it's going to take 8 months, then I would have a real concern for victims of domestic abuse and for those who are subject to coercive behaviour, because we have done an awful lot of work in regards to that. Do we have any idea of what that time, or is there a way we could scope that? Maybe not today, but scope that, because I think for people who are waiting for this, if they suddenly realise that there is a bill good to go, but we're going to bring it through this House, it'll take another year or whatever.
I mean, to some extent, I think it's fair to note that the Assembly can determine how long the legislation will take, because it will determine how long the period of scrutiny will be. So we can only offer an estimate based on past experience of taking legislation through, and it might be that this committee decides that it can still scrutinise properly, because this is a piece of legislation that there was significant work on done previously, as the Chair has already observed, and that would allow for the passage of the legislation more quickly than might have been the case in previous mandates. I think our assessment at the moment is that legislation in Westminster would be likely to be through before the summer recess, so before the summertime, whereas it may take longer for, you know, may well be the autumn or beyond before it was through the Assembly based on past experience. We do have some more, to be fair, that's based on the fact that Westminster would start now. We have to get the Minister to agree, we have to go to the Executive and get agreement to introduce, we have to come and consult the committee. So there are a range of processes to go through before we can actually start the formal scrutiny of the legislation in the Assembly. So that kind of builds in a little bit of extra time at the start of the process. But we'll be keen to try to expedite this as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Greg. Chair,
yes,
could I just also press on the police recruitment issue of the 7,500? I know it's going to be dependent on budgetary pressures. I get that. I think we all understand that. But you're right in saying that it will take a while to get to that figure, possibly 3, maybe 4 years to be able to get up to that number. Do you know at what stage we will get a press to go on that? You know, will it be based purely on what budget that will be given out, or is there a time frame to that?
So there's always 2 phases to a budget. The first is the Department of Finance set how much money the Department of Justice will receive, and then the department, working with the Minister, needs to decide how to allocate that money across So at the moment, we're not entirely clear about the timeframes for the budget to be brought forward, but we clearly envisage that it will happen before the end of March. So we ought to be in a position within 8 weeks or so, I guess, 8 to 10 weeks, to be able to be more clear about where we sit on that position.
Peter, perfect. And lastly, just on the Stormont House Agreement Bill, I'm just reading here that the Department has commissioned a technical advisor to produce a series of scoping papers. What does that actually look like? What's that actually like?
So, recognising that we don't yet know precisely what policy is being set, we do know that any organisation will need, it'll need accommodation, it'll need staff, it'll need IT, it'll need policies and procedures and so on. So just beginning to understand the nature of what will be required is a sensible sort of piece of preparatory work. So that's what the advisor is doing. As we see the legislation, when we see the legislation, and when we're clear about what it is that's required, we will then be able to firm up on the implementation plan. For the benefit of the committee, it may be useful to say our current estimate, but it does depend on what the legislation says, is that it would take about 2 years from the legislation being passed to actually set the historical investigations unit up properly.
And have you gauged how many homicide investigators you'd require? Has that been scoped?
And no, because I think that will depend on, critically, on decisions to be taken about what's within the scope of the HIU.
Peter, thank you, Chair.
And the speed at which it's to proceed.
Thank you, Doug. Paul Frew.
Thank you, Chair. Peter, thank you very much for your attendance here today. Can I just say, it'd be remiss of me, Chair, not to mention Peter's work in the interim period since this committee met before. As the previous and the outgoing Chair, I'd worked closely with Peter and his team and his department throughout all these lean years, and I acknowledge the pressure and the difficult position that you and your team and your departmental officials have been in and under, the pressure you've been under with regards to decision-making processes, and I think that needs to be acknowledged, Chair. Thank you for that attitude. Peter, in the budget, in the current budget, there's a line with regards to EU exit costs, I think 10.7 million, of which 9.8 million is for the PSNI. How in goodness did you ever come to that figure, I suppose, is the blunt way of asking that, given the state of flux that we have been in with regards to the EU exit? So,
it's a fair question. It was, we were all working at a period of great uncertainty around EU exit. What I would say is that the PSNI brought forward a business case in terms of recruiting additional police officers to meet the potential threats that might emerge depending on the nature of the EU exit. And that business case was accepted, and that 9.8 million very substantially has gone towards the recruitment of additional officers in the course of this financial year. And the very small amounts of money have been largely for administrative purposes within the department and other organisations to enable us just to have enough resource to be able to try and work out the likely impacts of EU exit. But you're right, it's been a moving picture.
So just to be clear then, it's about resource and building capacity at this stage,
yes,
going forward. Are you any of the wiser with regards to the withdrawal bill and the pressures that will fall under the Minister and the Department in the coming months?
So, I think on the 31st of January, when the UK leaves the EU, there is no change at that point in relation to justice-related measures because of the transition period. So our focus is on how we can make a contribution to the negotiation of what's called the Future Security Partnership, and how we can seek to either replicate or get as close as possible to some of the arrangements that have been in place with the EU. So there are a couple of key areas. There's a number of areas we can talk about, but the two biggest areas are the use of the European arrest warrant and the ability of law enforcement and other organisations to share data. That's policing, probation and others, where we aren't alone in having those issues. All of the UK has the issues, but we have them probably more fundamentally than others, just because we need to be able to use those powers more often and to share data more often. So that's the sort of been the focus of the work in relation to how we can develop that future security partnership. But it's not our negotiation; it's how we input to those who are negotiating that partnership.
Can I ask also on the budget? You talked about an outcomes delivery plan for the draft programme for government, which I think you said was placed in the Executive Office.
On the website.
On the website?
Yeah.
Are you confident that you're in a decent place, healthy place with regards to the Justice budget and the draft programme for government, whereby they are aligned and parallel as much as possible, so that the one complements the other? Or is there a lot of work still to do in that? Because I am mindful, when we were here before, we had seen the programme for government and the outcomes, but we didn't have a budget to place over the top of it. Are we there yet? Are you confident that we're there yet with regards to financing the draft programme for government properly?
So the budget is still set departmentally rather than by outcomes. So I cannot allocate a lump of money against each of the outcomes or each of the indicators. And I suspect that may always end up being quite challenging, because there are significant parts of the department's resources that go on statutory duties that may not naturally sit under one of the outcomes. I mentioned, for example, legal aid and compensation payments earlier. Neither of those would naturally sit under the different bits of the programme for government. I think that may not be the end objective, but I think certainly it would be good if we could get to a place where, as I highlighted, a number of the different responsibilities require lots of people to make a contribution, and to understand how the budget can become more flexible to enable that would be an important step forward, and I think that is a step that we have yet to take. Just
on the domestic violence piece, which is something that's dear to my heart, and the stalking piece, without a doubt, the principle here, the default principle should be that we legislate here in Northern Ireland. And there is an issue about time, though, of our victims and victims groups who are supporting victims and who have been waiting for this for so long. But there is an issue not only about time, there's an issue about making sure that this is Northern Ireland centric. And I'm led to believe that the legislation that would go through Westminster, there are things without that which we would really like to see in. Can you give us any detail on that, so that it gives us a better understanding that not only is it nicer and better and a principle to put through legislation here on our own and scrutinised with this committee, but actually it would be a better piece of legislation? And is there any possibility, if we are going to lose time, that the stalking piece could be brought up in order that you could have one bill? I know there are two different issues: domestic violence, sexual violence and stalking, but the outcomes will be a benefit to the people out there, and we could use the one vehicle of a bill as opposed to two, which would have to be segregated or put on a chain. If bringing them both together would help with regards to time. So
you're correct to say that the Westminster legislation wouldn't include all of the things that we would choose to bring forward, subject to a minister's view in Northern Ireland. And we can give you a more detailed briefing on precisely what that looks like in due course. As I understand, the general thrust of the committee's comments so far would be to try to accelerate the introduction of the domestic abuse legislation as quickly as possible. It would take us a few more months to be ready to put the stalking provisions in. And on that basis, it may well be that the Minister hasn't reached a final view, but I think it's her initial view that having short bills and keeping them to, especially when they're ready to go, might be a better way to go. But that is subject to her taking a final view on some of these things.
Final question, Chair. New decade, new approach. Obviously, the British government and the Irish government wrote this. it seems to be a case that a lot of departmental input has been placed within these pages. Has there been anything that you, as Permanent Secretary, added or wished this in to this document? Is there any of your wish lists within this?
I certainly didn't write any aspect of New Decade, New Approach. As I understand it, many of you would have been much closer to the production of this document than I was. But I think it may well feature aspects of agreements that were reached at various points of the talks process. I don't have any. I don't have a wish list that's included in the document.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Gordon Dunn.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair, and good to see you again, Peter. Just in relation to the legal aid, the review of the processes, having been a member of the committee that looked at that some time ago, I see that those recommendations came forward from the Public Accounts Committee that the department fully test the scope of generating savings from contracting legal aid services in Northern Ireland. I see from the information here that has been commissioned, but the department don't seem fully convinced that that is the way to go. Are you looking at other ways of how we can make significant savings in relation to the management of legal aid, which there certainly were weaknesses that were exposed within the system at that time, that there was certainly felt that there could very well be conflict of interest in relation to how it is managed and what has been done to try and address those issues?
Well, thank you for the question. You'll remember that the legal aid reform that was conducted previously was significant and was quite hotly contested at various stages. It is our view that there is the potential to make some further reforms, and those are reforms obviously that we will need to discuss with the Minister for Justice. In addition to other areas, you specifically mentioned a review of contracting, the idea perhaps of a public defender service or some similar model. So we did get an independent expert to do a review, and would be happy to share with the committee the outcome from the work that was done there. And that's a matter that obviously we'll need to discuss with our minister, and we haven't yet had the chance to do so in detail. But it didn't identify that the opportunity was a significant and huge one. The second area, and you mentioned about further ways in which we can bear down on legal aid. Clearly, we haven't reduced the scope of legal aid, as has been the case in England, despite the reforms that have been made. We are still looking to do more work through the reduction in fraud and error in terms of how the payments for legal aid are made, and we have the auditors have highlighted some issues that we need to address, and we're working meaningfully through those at the moment. And we hope that the additional management information available from digitising legal aid will be an assistance in that work.
And is it's now in place, the new system?
It went live in July 2019.
Yeah, which is our early days, but...
So it's working at the moment. I mean, the legal profession had some concerns at the time it was introduced, but we are able to make payments and make them more quickly than would have been the case previously. And we continue to work with the legal profession through a group that's been established to identify if there are tweaks that are needed to the system. A lot of systems, especially one as complicated as this, there is a need just to continue to try and improve the system as you go forward.
Okay. The other point, Chairman, just is on the repurposing of Woodlands juvenile justice system. There is significant work going on there. Going from your report, is that still on target and to be completed this year?
Well, it's not going to be completed this year. The timescale that we have set, the target timescale, is March 2022 for completion of the whole thing. So what we've done, this is very much joint work between the Department of Justice and the Department of Health, and there's a dedicated joint team established to take forward the work. We hope and expect that there will be draft design proposals available for consideration by the programme board soon, in the next month or so. And then we'll be going to both the new Justice and Health Ministers to make sure that the direction of travel is one that they are content with. But I think there is an opportunity here to use the facilities at Woodlands Juvenile Justice Centre and Lakewood Secure Care Centre in a way that meets the needs of both the justice and care sector better.
Will it result in significant investment within the Woodland site, or?
At the moment, I'm not clear that there will be a massive investment required in terms of new build. Woodlands is a well set up institution, as you well know, in your constituency, and it's the sort of area the committee may wish to go and visit at some stage to see what it looks like and to understand better what's planned. So that may be something that the committee would like to think about for part of its forward work programme.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Thanks, Chair.
Just a quick one. Are the accounts still being qualified when it comes to legal aid?
So the legal service agency accounts have a qualification in respect of fraud and error, but the department's accounts were not qualified this year.
Okay, I know Deborah's coming after you and it falls within her remit, so I'll follow up on that. But from memory, I think the accounts have been qualified for years.
So the departmental accounts were being qualified at one point, but I think I'm correct in saying that they are not currently being qualified. So that's evidence that progress is being made.
Not the department, but the agency.
Well, there's still more to do, but at one point the scale of the issue was of such magnitude that it was necessary to qualify the department's accounts.
Okay, well, Deborah's been forewarned. Raymond?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Peter, for the briefing. And these are just sort of general observations. In terms of, you've spoke to this to some degree, the legislative programme going forward, will the Minister, when she comes here, be in a place to lay out her programme, or is it still too early?
That would be the plan. I think I can't remember the date you've set, but it's a few weeks hence, so I would expect that we should be in a position by then.
And you've also said she's present of the mind to do separate, smaller bills.
In terms of the immediate bills that we face going forward.
Okay. And just a couple of other observations in relation to the Access and I Supreme Court judgment. It says here the Permanent Secretary has made some administrative changes to make it compatible, but there's legislation required. Is it still the intention to have legislation, or is administrative changes enough?
No, it's still legislation is required. We've done a sort of short-term fix to try and get over the worst of the problem, but it's not a way to continue.
Okay, so you envisage legislation?
Yes, this will be secondary legislation. That won't be primary legislation. Okay. It will require affirmative resolution, as I understand it.
And again, just general observations in terms of the policing board appointments process.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, was that a regular thing to happen, that the Secretary of State intervened and asked for a rerun of the competition?
Well, I suppose for the last 10 years, self-evidently, it's been for the Justice Minister to make that decision, and that hasn't been necessary. So it's not a regular thing, but it's not something within our gift. So in terms of that competition, the interviews are ongoing currently, and we do still expect the Minister to be in a position to make appointments to fill the vacancies.
Yeah, but when he took that decision, I assume it was he.
I think it was Karen Bradley.
Karen Bradley took it. Okay. Was there any advice from the department at the time in relation to the decision she was taking?
Well, the department had run a competition, and we were ready for the appointments to be made, but it was her decision that she didn't. She just filled the immediate vacancies.
Yeah, but it said revised criteria.
Sorry, do you want to give me the reference?
Maybe we can go back to it's unfair maybe in this particular instance.
I'm happy to try and answer the detail,
but I just noticed in terms of the probation board, the appointment process was criticised by the Commissioner.
That's correct.
I'm just, you're just being mindful of these type of appointments.
Yes. No, we're trying to make sure that we do follow best practice. Yeah.
It may be someone come back in a
Okay.
different briefing. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Rachel Woods.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter, for that overview. I'm just wondering a couple of questions here in terms of, first one is the criminal law on child sexual exploitation responses. Would you have any details on when those will be made public and when you expect them to be released?
I know that the consultation is complete. I would need to, perhaps I could come back to the committee in writing on that specific point, if that's okay.
Yep.
Just one more, Chair. In terms of the Centre of Restorative Excellence, have you any update in terms of where we are with this and who the lead department could be? And see that the multi-agency group has been meeting to discuss next steps, if you have any details on those.
So this is a centre that flows from the recommendation of the Independent Reporting Commission. The feasibility report confirmed that stakeholders see a need and a role for the centre. So the next steps are that we need an executive-wide approach. At this stage, we don't yet have clarity about which department will lead on that. That's something that needs to be addressed in the period ahead. And it was one of those areas where we were right on the cusp of whether progress could be made on this centre in the absence of ministers. We'd sought legal advice which hadn't been received before the return of ministers. So we're now in a place where we know we can move ahead, and that's what we'll be aiming to do in the period ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Patsy McGlone.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Peter, good to see you again. Peter, just in relation to the EU exit preparations there, I note in the whole document here there's heavy emphasis on policing and crime and justice and all those types of things. Has the department itself any input at all into citizenship issues with the Home Office? Now, that was raised with me over lunch there too. We met with the Romanian ambassador to the UK, and again there seems to be, they're reflecting back from their citizens who are living here this uncertainty among other EU citizens about the future. So I'm wondering, has there been any work initiated with, or even any remit or responsibility within the department around those particular issues which are of concern to a lot of people who are living in the north here?
No, issues relating to citizenship and immigration and so on are not devolved, and so the department doesn't have any locus, and we have not been doing any work in that area.
I'm thinking of who then is the person, or who's the department which would have responsibility to ensure that those issues are correctly and properly reflected back to the Home Office, because we're in an unusual situation here.
Well, insofar as the Executive Office leads overall in relation to EU exit, so insofar as there are issues that need to be brought globally together, then I think the Executive Office would naturally be in the lead.
Okay.
They probably still would not be getting into the specifics of, for example, immigration policy or whatever it might be, just because we won't have the competence or the skills in that area.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Members, any other points you want to follow up on? Okay, Peter, if I can just ask in summary, you give a broad outline of a lot of different issues. If you had 3 critical issues that you're advising the Minister on, the pressures that the department's facing, what 3 would they be?
Do you mean financial pressures or more pressures of delivery, or
Financial pressures and also on the delivery side?
That's a good but difficult question to answer. I think that the starting point has to be the programme for government for all of this. That has to be the overarching direction. So the work we're doing on speeding up justice, on reducing reoffending and reducing crime is the central focus for the department. Clearly, a new programme for government may come forward and it may adjust or amend that, but pending that, that has to be the key way forward. And beyond that, the 2 other areas I would draw out, a number of your colleagues have referenced the need to keep a very close eye on what the EU exit will mean. So that's a key pressure. We don't know yet whether that will have a financial dimension or not. And then Sir John Gillen has not just done a review on serious sexual violence, but also on civil justice and on family justice. And overall, there are over 600 recommendations from those 3 reviews. So reaching a prioritised way forward on all of those to try to make progress in the areas that will matter the most in the period ahead, in this sort of 2-year period, would be another area that I would draw out as being really important.
Peter, can I again thank you for coming to the committee at our first meeting, and I've no doubt you'll be quite happy to come again at a future
Indeed.
point. Obviously, we're going to get a briefing from each of your directors in the areas that they have to deal with, but in the first instance, you've been very helpful at providing the committee with a very good starting point for us to scope further work from. So thank you, Peter.
Sorry, can I ask one wee quick question, Chair, your indulgence? Peter, can I ask, the first day brief, was that the first day brief that you presented to the Minister?
Yes.
Okay, can I just commend you on your transparency to this committee? 'Cause it's very, very good to have that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your help.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
In time.
Okay, members, we'll keep moving, and we'll move into the next item. So I'll ask the officials then within the Justice Delivery Directorate if they would like to step forward. Again, just as you're taking your seats, and please put yourselves at ease, if I can welcome Deborah Brown, who is the Director of the Justice Delivery Directorate. Deborah, what was your role in communities back in the day?
I was the Director of Finance, and I was the Director of Housing, and I was the Deputy Secretary in charge of Engaged Communities. Okay,
so in a previous life I knew Deborah and was very competent in her role within that department. So welcome, Deborah, to the committee. With Stephen Martin, who is Deputy Director of Enabling Access to Justice Division, Sinead Simpson, who is Acting Deputy Director of Corporate Engagement and Communications and Compensation Services, and Ray Murray, again Deputy Director of Information Services Division. And you're all very welcome to the meeting. As before, it'll be recorded by Hansard. So, Deborah, I'm going to hand over to you at this stage, if you can just outline the scope of your responsibilities.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the committee for this opportunity for us to provide you with an overview of the responsibilities of the Justice Delivery Directorate. Our work includes a range of corporate functions across the department and its agencies, with responsibility for ensuring good governance and financial management. It also includes enabling access to justice and the Legal Services Agency. There are 5 deputy directors and approximately 350 staff in this directorate. This afternoon, I'm joined by Ray Murray, who is the Head of Information Services, which also includes Access NI. I'm also here with Sinead Simpson, who is the Head of Corporate Engagement and Communications, and this area also includes Compensation Services. And by Stephen Martin, who is the Head of Enabling Access to Justice. And they will provide you with more detail on their areas in a moment. Lisa Rocks is the department's Finance Director, and she and I and a few other colleagues will be back in a couple of weeks' time to give you a separate briefing on the department's finances. The Financial Services Division provides the financial planning and the support across the department and its 5 agencies, and also supports the department's sponsor branches in respect of the 8 non-departmental public bodies. This area is responsible for the department's annual report and accounts, agency and judicial pension scheme accounts. It provides procurement support, including collaborative procurement and contract management. It also provides economic advice, guidance and support, which includes the development of business cases. It also includes research, statistical and analytical services, which helps to inform policy and support the programme for government. Paul Andrews is the Chief Executive of the Legal Services Agency and Director of Legal Aid Casework. Legal aid remains a demand-led service, and the agency has a current budget this year of £88 million, and we are on schedule to deliver this. But there are a number of small, large criminal cases that could impact on the future year budgets. As you've already heard, over the last 3 years, LSA has been focusing on a new digital case management system known as LAMS, the Legal Aid Management System. This has been an award-winning success. It has won an internal departmental award, was nominated for a NICS award, and was a finalist at the 2019 UK IT Awards for the Best Public Sector IT Project. It went live in July of this year, or July 19, and it should introduce greater efficiency and effectiveness in the delivery of legal aid. During this time, we worked very closely with the Law Society and the Bar to secure that successful go live in July, and we continue to work with them to inform the future developments of the system, and we wish to express our thanks for their commitment to date. Work is also continuing to provide more reliable estimates on fraud and error and on provisions on which the LSA accounts are currently qualified. As you heard earlier, this has not impacted on the departmental accounts, but we keep this under review. So I'm now going to pass you to Stephen Martin, who will give you some more information on the progress around legal aid reform and wider issues on enabling access to justice.
Chair, I lead a relatively new team called Enabling Access to Justice, and we have two main roles. Firstly, to continue the journey of legal aid reform, and secondly, along with other colleagues, to look for opportunities to modernise civil and family justice, which Peter mentioned, for the benefit of citizens. But running through both areas is the core theme of ensuring access to justice while improving value for money. We're coming to the end of our first year, and over this time we've been building and skilling up the team. We've delivered a number of technical legal aid policy projects, and in due course you'll receive 6 statutory rules to consider that we made during that time. We've developed relationships with a range of stakeholders, both here and in other jurisdictions, and have built options to talk to the Minister about for a future agenda. And as you've heard, we've also completed a scoping study on the potential to introduce contracting for legal aid services in Northern Ireland. In relation to family justice, we've also begun some specific work with the Department of Health on helping separating parents reach viable solutions without needing to go to court. And finally, with others, we've established a litigant in-person reference group, which brings together a range of stakeholders alongside personal litigants to find ways of improving the experience of personal litigants in the court system in Northern Ireland. So that's my initial. I'm happy to take questions later and hand over to Ray.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity of presenting my division. Some of it's already been mentioned. In my division is Access and I, which is the vetting and barring system for those wishing to take up employment with young people or vulnerable adults. This is the direct public service. There's about 140,000 transactions a year in the service. At the moment, we've moved all applications to 100% online, and 50% of digital certificates, our certificates are delivered digitally. So you can see I travel in hope of a paperless office, but we're not quite there yet. In terms of information technology, which is one of the other big areas, my division provides technology support to all of the department's business systems, with the exception of PSNI. The legal aid management system, LAMS, which you've already mentioned, but there are a large number of other critical IT systems across the department that enable its business delivery. Causeway is one you may be familiar from past, which is one of the critical ones for the department, and its feeder systems from the various agencies in criminal justice, absolutely critical to its delivery. But whether it's in enhancing or testing or security or contract negotiation and management or other technology issues, ICT professional staff from my division are outposted to provide the necessary support across the department. Another area that falls to my division is records and information management, and that involves the policy and processes of records management, including their disposal, and we work closely with the PRONI, with the Records Office in Northern Ireland, as well as the management of the corporate file plan for the department. They all fall to my division. We have a number, as part of that, we have a number of statutory roles, such as the Data Protection Officer and Chief Information / Records Management Manager for the department. We also cover freedom of information and data protection monitoring and management. Finally, in terms of the big areas within my division, estates and sustainability. My division has a coordinating role and leadership role in managing the department's estate and the sustainability agenda, which focuses on reducing our carbon footprint collaboratively through the Asset Management Board, which is chaired by Deborah. And lastly, my division provides representation to a number of NICS cross-departmental groups. including ones around sustainability, and also manages small areas on behalf of the department, such as the complaints officer function, health and safety function, programme and project support function, etc. But the areas that I've highlighted are the main ones covered by my division. I pass back to Sinead.
Thanks, Ray.
Good afternoon. As Deborah said, I manage Corporate Engagement and Communications Division, and it's akin to how Ray has described as commonly referred as a number of corporate service type functions. So I have responsibility for Peter's office, the PermSec's office, the Minister's private office, the departmental assembly team and the assembly liaison arrangements, the press office, a range of governance functions including business planning and equality, a range of people and organisational development work streams, and as Peter said when he was here, we are a people-centric organisation, so we have a significant value in our people programme that comes under that work stream. I also have responsibility for internal communications, and then just quite recently have taken on responsibility for compensation services, so that's the only bit that's not a corporate service, it's an operational delivery part. I think the three key issues that I would draw out for members within my brief are, firstly, we are making some structural changes in order to provide a more cohesive approach to how we do governance. Governance has been done within the department across a number of business areas, so we're seeking to develop a corporate governance function, a governance unit which will ensure that we're well placed for any challenges that emerge from RHI. And that function would also take on board public appointments responsibility, which is spread across a number of business areas. So that was a point that was mentioned in the earlier discussion. The second issue that we have responsibility for is that members might be interested in, is the development of the department's corporate and business plan. And over the coming months, we'll obviously be in discussions with the Minister about her strategic priorities for the rest of the mandate, and we'll be happy to come and share the draft plan in due course with you. And then the third issue that I would highlight is under the compensation services banner, and plans to remove the same household rule from the Northern Ireland Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme. I'd be happy to get it more detailed for the committee, but that is a piece of legislation that will be coming for scrutiny in due course. But just a bit of a potted history on what that is. You couldn't claim criminal injuries compensation for injuries inflicted by someone living in your household during the period 1968 to 1988. That bar was then lifted in 1988, so subsequent cases you could, but it wasn't made retrospective until there was a Court of Appeal decision in November 18. So in order to give effect to that, officials have been preparing the necessary arrangements and getting legal advice on those. So it is a piece of legislation that has gone through Westminster with pretty smooth passage. It was pretty much one that was supported from all sides, and it came into effect in June last year. So we look forward to bringing more detail on that to the committee in due course and working with you to bring that through the Assembly, hopefully. Those are the main issues I would draw out.
Okay, thank you. The 8 other bodies at arm's length but fall within the department, how do you manage the risks associated with that relationship, particularly when it comes to the financial aspects of it and then when it comes to governance?
Okay, so 7 of those arm's length bodies sit in under another directorate under Safer Communities. The largest of those is the PSNI. The finance side of the house provides a business partnering model, so we provide the support to those sponsor branches on all of their finances. Given the size of the PSNI budget, we as finance colleagues meet monthly with finance colleagues in PSNI to make sure that we have sufficient oversight of what is going on there and we understand the pressures. We also then work very closely on the development of any business cases, some very large ones obviously from the police, so we provide that level of support. From a governance point of view, as Sinead has just stated, we are just in the process of setting up a governance unit. All of the sponsorship arrangements, as I say, rest solely in one other directorate. There is a new partnership agreement that's coming into play which replaces the old MSFM, and we as a department are looking at how that might change the dynamic of the relationship with our arm's length bodies. But in the time that I've been in the department, 10 months, I think it's fair to say that there's quite a mature relationship with our arm's length bodies, and I think that sponsorship arrangement works well. It'll be interesting to see the outworkings of this new partnership arrangement.
Just from for my own assistance, what's MSFM?
Management Statement of Financial Memorandum.
Yeah, thank you.
It's the one which sets out what all of the
That's what it is.
parameters are. Sorry, I have to stop using acronyms. Note to
No,
self.
I'm sure all the members around the committee knew what it meant. I didn't. In terms of how those well, they're not arm's length bodies, but obviously the PSNI, for example, have their own board.
Yes.
So how do you respect their independence, but in the same respect acknowledge that you're the department that gives them the money?
Well, obviously they are operationally independent, so what we just make sure is we have a very mature relationship with them and make sure that we fully understand where their pressures are. Of course, we have a scrutiny and a challenge rule when it comes to business cases, make sure that the need is clearly demonstrated. So we work very much in partnership with it, and I think that the new arrangements that are coming into place will very much reflect an existing relationship that we have with PSNI.
On the legal aid issue, £88 million, maybe you know offhand what the budget was over the past number of years and what's the trajectory of spend?
So with the legal aid reforms that have happened over the years, I think the legal aid budget has come down from about 105 million down to, over the past couple of years, it's kind of stayed around, static around the 84, 85 million. This year, it's gone up a little bit on the 88, and we think that is really just because the system is now helping to get the payments out faster. So where people might have been concerned about the time lag around their payments, we're now just almost like playing catch up. So we're watching that very carefully. We have secured the additional funding in year to make sure we can manage that little bit of extra pressure to meet the 88 million. And the system will obviously give us some better management information, which will help us then to look at future projections and any pressures that there might be. But there are a couple of large criminal cases at the moment. There's with about 30 defendants, and those just obviously have the potential just to tip the balance on your normal sort of projections that you would have. So again, we're keeping a close eye on that. And whenever you were talking about the 55 million of pressures for next year, legal aid is in there because we think a couple of those cases will start to pull down some payments.
And if we had parity and equality across the United Kingdom in this and what came within the scope of legal aid, has there been any cost analysis carried out as to what the legal aid budget would be if we operated on the same basis as GB?
Okay, I'm going to let Stephen answer that one.
I mean, the short answer, Chair, is that we haven't got that. There's some old work done by the OECD from 2014, but the legal aid bill has come down since then. But it is fair to say that even accounting for differences in scope and so on, our legal aid system is, per head of population, more expensive than the legal aid systems of our neighbouring jurisdictions. That absolutely is the case, but we haven't got to the point yet where we've got detailed analysis of where those differentials are. As you rightly said, in England and Wales, there's a much narrower scope. The comparison with Scotland is a little bit fairer because they have a similar sort of scope to ours. We're probably something in the region of, I think, roughly a quarter to a third more expensive than Scotland. But there are quite a lot of murmurings in Scotland about the legal aid rates being fairly low, and practitioners in Scotland have withdrawn from the legal aid market. So there are some issues in Scotland, but it is difficult to get a fair benchmark.
Mm-hmm. And finally, on this aspect, the fraud and error aspect of the account still being qualified. Can you just elaborate as to why there's concern around fraud and error, or what does that relate to?
So it's very similar to the situation we would have had in DFC around the benefits, which in LSA we are a wee bit further behind in being able to estimate what we think the levels of fraud and error are. And as a consequence, that's why the audit office are qualifying us, because we can't give a reliable estimate. So at the moment we're actually engaging with our colleagues in DFC to learn the lessons that they have around this and trying to build that up. The last set of accounts, of course, the 18-19 were qualified, but the audit office did comment that they felt that the department was making progress in this area, but they did recognise that the scale of the issue was still not fully understood, and it could take a number of years before we remove the qualification, but I think they were content that we were making sufficient progress.
And the balance of error versus fraud?
well, this is a very technical issue because you have to prove that it actually is a fraud. So in the first instance, it could be an error, and then we have to get into the whole issue about proving that it's a fraud. And the Audit Office has a methodology where if you can't prove that it was right, they will deem it an error. So there's an awful lot of complexities within how this is actually estimated.
Okay, I'm sure we'll look at that again. Ray, Access NI, remind me, how many applications are you processing a year?
It's about 140,000 transactions that are completed a year.
Okay, can I ask, how many people who apply for approval through Access NI get refused?
Very, very few. There are approximately single figures for the number that are refused, the potential to work with young people and vulnerable adults. There are very few.
Okay. The system, just remind me, was changed that you applied once and that was applicable, or do you still need clearance for every organisation?
Unfortunately, Chair, you still need clearance for every organisation. The portability of clearances was never successfully dealt with for two reasons. One, a previous Justice Minister decided that the best, most effective and efficient way to do it was to go with the English and Wales barring system, which was developing a new system which would have included the portability to transfer from one clearance to the person having multiple, instead of multiple clearances.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we went on that because it would have been passed to us without costs. That project collapsed after about 2 years and left us with no way forward other than, well, there was always going to be legislation required to change the approach, but also it would mean the procurement of a new system because the suppliers of our current system in Northern Ireland can't enhance the system. It's quite old now. They can't enhance it to cover that. So there's a two-step process required to move to that. It's still a desirable objective, but the two-step process would be legislation and a new system.
Okay. It seems strange if we're in the single figures for refusal and you've the numbers that actually have to apply, that there isn't yet a system devised that when you're approved, that then can be carried across organisations.
And also to give employers access to the system that would allow them to look up when approvals were dated and make the judgment themselves as to how long ago it was, because obviously in some ways a bit like an MOT certificate, it's valid on the day it was issued, but not necessarily 2 years later.
Yeah.
So all of those are still in discussion, and I think our new minister will have to make a call on where we go forward on that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Patsy?
All right, thanks, Chair. Just picking up on that theme there. So, of those 120,000, have you any indication how many of those are repeat?
I don't. To be absolutely honest, I don't have the figure at this point, but I can tell you there are significant numbers which are repeats.
If a person even applies for multiple jobs and it's just back in again, absolutely. And often, as you're aware, that can delay their getting a position in a job.
Absolutely, but that is the legislation as we stand.
I understand that. And is there any methodology of, and I understand somebody could have a certificate now and could be appearing before the courts in a month or two's time, and what's the link up between courts or police and yourselves then for immediate sort of transfer of information? In other words, if somebody receives a conviction in the court, for whatever that may be, how soon or what methodology is there of transferring that information over to yourselves?
Well, I mentioned earlier the Causeway system. As part of the Causeway system, there's a criminal record viewer. Yes. The criminal record viewer records all criminal convictions. There's a look-up capability to the criminal record viewer, which will allow us to look up criminal convictions. But very often, cases are in progress with PSNI that we wouldn't know about because they haven't been through the courts and resulted in a conviction. So there's a two-tier approach to that. One is to look up the criminal record viewer, but the second one is to contact the PSNI to see if there are cases in train. Now, that is a difficult one because until they go through, the person is innocent until proven guilty. But we do take a view as to the police perception of where the cases are as well, and we do link with police, and we have a number of police resources working on dealing with enhanced checks.
And does that make it any headway?
Well, it allows us to identify quicker the point that you're making quicker, whether there are cases where we should refuse a certificate, and that's all.
Right, what I mean is, you had 120,000 there. I'm sure maybe you know off the top of your head how many were the year previous to that. And
Yes.
what are turnaround times like?
Well, our turnaround targets are 90, they're for the different, there's
Yeah.
basic, enhanced and checks. Our targets are 96% and we're meeting those targets consistently. The only area where we're not meeting targets is where we have to pass them to PSNI.
Forgive my ignorance,
Yes.
96% of what?
Of the total applications meet a turnaround time of days.
How many days? That's the bit I'm trying to get.
It's 3 days, I think it's,
All right.
I could stand corrected on that because it is different for
Okay.
basic and enhanced checks.
So
But the one that we can't do is enhanced checks because it goes to PSNI.
So most of them then you're saying are turned around within 3-4 days, whatever it is?
Almost, yes, absolutely.
Right, okay. Okay, thank you for that.
And the targets are published as well, so our targets are published.
Thanks. Just if I could maybe come over to, there's another issue there, courts and tribunal service. Is that you, Mr. Martin?
No.
No?
No,
Isn't?
Courts
No.
and Tribunal Service isn't part of the Justice Delivery Directorate.
No, but there, though it was a kind of a policy issue, maybe I better reserve that for them, isn't it? Can I relay what you,
Yes,
what it is?
absolutely. Relay it to us and we can feed it back.
Just to explain, I see their tribunals disposed of approximately 12,000 cases. I've seen, I don't know why there's a pattern like that, but I've seen a pattern of a lot more tribunals being referred to courts. This is Social Security Appeal Tribunals.
Okay.
And for people with vulnerabilities, for people who are mentally frail or anxious, moving to a court setting isn't the best place for them to be, because instinctively, rightly or wrongly, with that comes that you're up in court for something, or somebody might see you in court for something, and it's an issue that I've noticed increasingly in the area that I'm in. But I'll just park it at that because it's something that maybe is well to raise with them. And then, well, there's another one for the Youth Justice Agency, but it's a wider policy issue too, and that is suicide among young people has been very much in the news recently. Awful situation for a lot of families. The instances of young people who are institutionalised maybe for a period of time, for maybe older people who are in prison for a period of time. Just thinking of the link up between youth justice, probation, prison service with health services and the likes of that. I don't know how you're able to tell me now, but I'd appreciate if we could have some sort of insight. Perhaps we could write to the committee to give us an insight how that's moving along, or if it's moving along, just please.
I think Ronnie Armour and his team, the head of the Youth Justice and Probation, I think they're with the committee next week, and I think it will be their intention to cover those issues.
Ah, good. Well, we can speak to them about that then. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Linda?
Thank you. Thank you for all your presentations. Just a quick question on the reform, and excuse my ignorance, I'm a new member of the committee. So, in relation to the reform around legal aid, is it driven by savings, or is it driven by actually reforming it to make it a better service? That's really, I suppose, what I want to know, because there are things that may appear to add cost. For example, there are a lot of people in domestic violence situations that fall outside of being entitled to benefits but are on very low incomes and are not able to get assistance with things like non-molestation orders, for example. Very, very small cost involved, but they don't have that, £300 or £400, and they need something put in place urgently. You then have the knock-on effect of the police being continually called out where they can't arrest the person because there's not a non-mol in place. So they're having to build up a case, which that then has a different cost, which is probably much more than the £300 or £400 you would pay for the non-mol in the first place, which would allow the PSNI to come straight out and arrest that person for, for drinking the non-mol. So I would just like maybe a wee bit, you don't have to give me all of the information now, but I would like something, even in a written form, as to whether it is savings driven or whether it is about reform for actually making things better. I'm thinking even along the lines of Justice Gillen's recommendations. Obviously, some of these things will fall within that, particularly around the family courts and things like that. So, there are some things that might, on the face of it, appear to cost more, but in the long term, PSNI budget comes out of justice as well. So, in the long term, there will be savings. So, short term savings don't always equate to savings, to real
I'll let Stephen cover that.
savings.
I mean, I think what I can say is what the purpose of legal aid reform was before. Obviously, we haven't yet had a chance to fully talk to the Minister about her intentions going forward. Before, it was about achieving value for money. So, two aspects of that. One is cost. So, what was the cost of legal aid delivering the right outcomes at the right amount of money? And the second, quality. And there were a number of there was a PAC report as well driving that. I suppose the purpose of my division is broader than legal aid, and it's a new division. So what we've been looking for is, as well as opportunities to look perhaps in a more holistic way than perhaps has been the way before. So we're looking for opportunities to enable access to justice for citizens. Still very clear about value for money. So part of the other work that we do, we work with colleagues who, non-molestation orders and the policy around that doesn't sit with me, but colleagues who work in that kind of area in the department, we work together to see if as they're working on a new area of policy, if changes in legal aid policy is needed alongside that to make the policy effective. So, for example, on committal reform, which the committee will consider the legislation in due course, we're working very closely with our policy colleagues working on that to make sure that there are legal aid arrangements that ensure access to justice while delivering value for money. So those kinds of issues we wouldn't be leading on, the kind of policy around non-molestation, but if there was a change in policy, we'd work alongside colleagues, but always mindful of making sure that whatever arrangements are in place represent value for money.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Doug Beattie.
Thank you, Chair. Deborah, I'm looking at the piece about speeding up justice, and you talk about cases taking 167 days down to 155, very specific. But then you say the Crown Courts are taking significantly longer. And if I flick across to the statistics for McGabbery and McGilligan and High Bank Wood, we see that there's huge amounts on remand, and I'm imagining those on remand or who are waiting for Crown Courts mostly. Do we have an idea of when we say significantly longer, what are we talking?
Okay, so this isn't my area,
okay.
but this is Glenn Capper looks after this area on the whole. So that what they're looking at is the whole journey that it's taking a particular person through to try and look at where are the bottlenecks, where are the opportunities, to speed that up for them. So I can take it away and get you some more information on it.
Yeah, and it's really, if you can, please to find out what are we doing to speed up
Yeah.
So what practically are we doing to try and speed this up? And I know there's a few things that we talked about in the last Justice Committee about how they were trying to do it, but I'm just wondering where we've gone in regards to that. And secondly, Sinead, can I just ask something, and apologies, because you said something, and it pricked my ears, but I didn't quite get it. We were talking about the criminal injuries compensation scheme and the same household rule.
So if you've... Sorry. So if you do you want me just to explain a bit more?
Could you just, I kind of get it. I think are we going to bring ourselves in line with the rest of the United Kingdom?
Yes, and there is a Court of Appeal decision in November 2018 that requires us to make the change, but in effect it would be to bring us into line with the legislation across the world.
And that legislation in GB is to what's it backdated to what date?
It's back 19. We have a gap. If you were assaulted by someone within the same household and there was a prosecution post 1988, you would be eligible for criminal injuries compensation. But if that happened 1968 to 1988, the legislation currently does not allow us to pay out compensation. So the effect of this change would be to allow any cases 68 to 88 would allow us to pay compensation. Yeah.
And sorry, just and this is pedantic a little bit, I guess, but what happens pre-68? Nothing.
I would need to check. I am not.
It's just if it's a historical something historical that comes out. I was just trying to figure out what
the significance of the 68 is.
I think that the 68 is the significance. Shall I thank you for that? Thank you, Chair.
And have you quantified how many people would be in the 68 to 88?
Some work has been done on it. I don't have the figures to hand on exactly how. They know that there would have been applications that were made that had to be refused because there are numbers for those. I think it's in a few hundred. I'd need to check though, and I'll come back to the committee. But I suppose there's the unknown. There's the people who didn't apply because they knew the legislation didn't allow. So it's a long period of time. I suppose there will have been people who could have been eligible but will have passed on. So I mean, I can get a bit more detail
Yeah.
for you on that if that would be
Please do.
helpful.
And again, that will create another budget pressure.
Yeah. Okay. Any other members, Paul?
Yeah, can I ask just on that point, is that a set amount of compensation?
There-
Or is it a case by case?
It would be on a case-by-case basis, but there are tariffs for the criminal injuries compensation scheme, so there will be an assessment made. The issue is that you know, there would be, obviously with the passage of time, and particularly because of the type of injuries you're talking, it would be an assessment of the emotional and mental health impact, so that would vary on a case by case, but there are tariffs.
And would you then have to make account of the emotional aspect with regards to time delay?
Yeah, all of that would have to, and obviously that wouldn't be done by administrative staff. There would be professional medical experts would be given opinions on that.
Just on another point, more an observation than a question to the panel. On Patsy's point and experience around tribunals and courts, can I just say that in Ballymena's situation, the courthouse is actually the best place to have appeals. It's private, it's courtroom 3, and it's more like a classroom than a courthouse. And the other venue we use in Ballymena, that's a boardroom, and it's much more off-putting for people going there where they're having to sit around a boardroom. So just on that point.
Okay. When the relevant officials are up, we'll elaborate, I'm sure. Nobody else. Can I thank everyone in your team for coming up to the committee today? Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, members, we'll proceed to the next item on the agenda, which is item 13, and this is to deal with the next number of statutory rules that the committee needs to deal with. Pages 141 to 158 of your meeting pack will give you the relevant information. This is one of 5 rules that's on the agenda. The examiner for statutory rules will report her findings on the technical elements of the statutory rule in the near future. Normally, obviously, the committee would have considered the statutory rule whenever the examiner's report was available. However, the statutory time period within which the committee can scrutinise these rules is coming to an end and are on the agenda for today's consideration. This rule provides for when, how and by whom the opportunity to make a victim statement and supplementary victim statements is to be afforded in cases where the Director of Public Prosecutions has the conduct of criminal proceedings. Being afforded an opportunity to make a statement applies to a victim, bereaved family member and a parent of a young victim. The rule is subject to negative resolution. The previous Justice Committee agreed that it was content with the Department to make the statutory rule. The Department has said that there has been no changes to the policy content since the SL1 was submitted to the previous Justice Committee. And so if members are content with the statutory rule, subject to the findings of the examiner of statutory rules, then we will proceed to putting the formal question. The information in respect of it is all within members' meetings pack. So unless members require any further clarification on this, then we will proceed to put the formal question. That the Committee for Justice considered SR 2016/431, the Victims Statement Regulations, Northern Ireland 2016, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Members agreed?
Agreed.
The next item then, 14, pages 160 to 211. This rule amends Appendix 2 of the County Court Rules, Northern Ireland 1981. It updates the scale costs that are payable to solicitors and barristers in proceedings in the County Court, following a review that was carried out by the County Court Rules Committee. It's the first review following the increase in County Court jurisdiction in 2013 from 15,000 to 30,000. The scale costs are used for privately funded legal services within the County Court, and there are no direct financial implications to the Department. It's subject to negative resolution. Previous Justice Committee had agreed that it was content for the Department to make the rule, and the Department has confirmed that there have been no changes to the policy since the SL1 was submitted to the previous Justice Committee. So if members are content with the statutory rule, subject to the findings of the examiner of statutory rules, then I'll proceed to put the formal question to members, unless there's anything members are wanting to raise. Again, the information is there in the pack. Then I'll move to the formal question.
Chair, just one wee thing there. There's an increase there for the fee. The increase is up from £42 to £60 under the committee recommendation. Quite a significant increase, percentage-wise.
Yep.
I would make that comment. It's quite significant.
It relates to this is to do with the private proceedings,
Yeah, I
in
understand
terms of
it, yeah,
cases.
yeah.
So there isn't
Yeah.
a
It's quite
public funding implication
Yeah.
of it. It has been operational
Yeah,
for
I appreciate
past
that.
number of years.
2017, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And I'll put the question to members that the Committee for Justice considered SR 2017/19, the County Court Amendment Rules Northern Ireland 2017, and has no objection to the rule. Agreed?
Great, yeah.
Item 15, pages 213 to 225. This rule makes a number of minor technical amendments to police pension regulations, the Northern Ireland 2015 and Royal Ulster Constabulary Pensions, Additional Voluntary Contributions Regulations 1993. The amendments make a minor word change to remove any ambiguity, to clarify a legislative reference, and addresses a minor drafting error that was identified by the examiner of statutory rules. Similar amendments were applied to the police, civil service and judicial pension schemes, both here and in England and Wales and Scotland. The rule does not make any policy change to the public sector schemes reformed design. Again, the rule is subject to negative resolution. Previous Justice Committee agreed that it was content for the Department to make the rule, and the Department has confirmed that there have been no changes to the policy content since the SL1 was submitted to the previous Justice Committee. So if members are content with the statutory rule, unless there's any questions, then I'll put the formal question to the committee. That the Justice Committee for Justice considered SR 2017/26, the Police Pensions Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2017, and has no objection to the rule. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, this one, members, I'm going to ask officials to come, Joe, to come to the table. It had previously been considered by the last Justice Committee, and Paul Frew was involved in this one. And so there was a little bit of debate then, so I thought for this one we might just get a little bit of clarity before we proceed to putting the question to the committee. It's on pages 227, members, to 247. The rule amends the Costs Protection Irish Convention Regulations 2013, which provide costs protections for certain environmental cases. EU law requires that the costs of bringing a court challenge to certain decisions affecting the environment must not be prohibitively expensive. The requirement stems from the Irish Convention and would apply, for example, to the cost of judicial review in respect of a road building or other significant construction. This rule amends the 2013 regulations to enhance both the flexibility and clarity of the arrangement in relation to levels of costs, protections, costs on appeal, eligibility for cost protection and interim injunctions. And again, the rule is subject to negative resolution. Previous Justice Committee had agreed that it was content with the Department to make the rule, and again the Department has confirmed that there have been no changes since the SL1 was submitted to the previous committee. So I wanted just to ask a simple question. What's the difference between what was in place in 2013 and the effect that this rule makes provision for?
The 2013 regulations had fixed limits, so an individual would only ever have to pay £5,000 if he or she lost an environmental or judicial review that was subject to these regulations. And these amended regulations offer a little bit more flexibility so that the individual can actually make the case to the court that that limit of £5,000 would still be prohibitively expensive. And that's the obligation under international law, is that members of the public must have access to a review of an environmental decision which is not prohibitively expensive. We've got lots and lots of case law on what prohibitively expensive actually means, and our regulations codify that case law. They set out the factors that the court has to take into account in deciding whether or not sticking to those fixed bans would be prohibitively expensive, or whether in fact the court should exercise its discretion and allow more flexible bans.
And in the final adjudication on that, where does the power rest?
Rest with the court.
So it'll be for the judge to decide in respect of that issue?
So these cases are in the High Court and the Court of Appeal. It's environmental, judicial reviews and statutory reviews.
And I know obviously this has been in operation already. Has there been an impact to the change?
We tried to get some statistics, but we don't actually record when these cost orders are actually awarded. And anecdotally, we don't think there have been many cases that are actually subject to the regulations.
Okay. Anyone else? Doug?
Just a quick quote, Joe. Excuse me. So that 5,000, but it's still a cap. So,
Yes.
so the court can't find that they have to pay more. That
No,
5's a
that's
cap.
the maximum cost exposure.
What they can say is, actually, you're only going to pay £1,000, not
Yeah.
5. So the cap doesn't move.
The cap doesn't move.
Okay,
So it's
okay.
£5,000 for individuals and £10,000.
Yeah, no, happy enough. Thank you.
Okay. Patsy?
Just for clarification, I'm trying to get my head slightly around this here. So, we'll take the case of the A6, the gentleman that represented himself in court and all that. That, you may or may not know, contributed, the delay in that contributed significantly to the cost of the A6 scheme. Would someone like that fit into this category?
Well, the actual convention itself gives members of the public the right to ask a court to review an environmental decision. So you've got the right to have the decision reviewed.
Yes.
And then that's when these cost protection regulations will come into play, because it can't be prohibitively expensive. But you'll always have the right to review a decision that comes within the scope of the convention.
Mm-hmm. Which somebody would have anyway.
Yes, well, we have it because we're party to the convention.
Aye. No, but this is just about making sure that the costs aren't prohibitive.
Yes, these particular regulations. Yeah.
Right, okay. Surely that's down to the person and level of engagement, legal engagement and that they have. No?
Do you mean in terms of
The costs?
whether they... Well, in the normal course of events, it's a loser pays,
Yes.
and there are no, in the High Court and the Court of Appeal, there are no fixed bans or limits on what your cost exposure may be. Whereas if it's a particular case that falls within the scope of these regulations, there's a fixed limit as to what your cost exposure will be, and there's also a fixed limit as to what the other side have to pay you as well.
And it's purely around environmental issues.
It's
the arbiter of, because somebody could have a loose interpretation of what is an environmental and isn't.
No, it has to be a case that falls within the scope of the Aarhus Convention.
All right,
And
okay.
that's specified in the regulations. And there's also provision for you to argue whether or not your case is within the scope of the convention.
Right, okay. All right. Okay, Chair, thanks.
Paul Ferry?
I might be sad, Chair, but I think I remember this debate in the last, I think it was Alex Atwood.
I think the Hansard of your contributions are in the pack.
And he was concerned about making sure that there was availability and that everyone could attain of a court if need be. Can I ask the question around, I know ours is all about environmental issues, but is there any cases whereby a rival contractor can use that convention in order to stop a tendering process or stop a project?
So the convention applies to members of the public, and there's a specific definition as to what that is. And so if the contractor fulfills the criteria to be classified as a member of the public, then...
Just picking up on what, so a contractor could do that or have a proxy do it for him, or?
The regulations are framed in such a way that it's either an applicant is either an individual or a legal entity. So it might be, for example, somebody who's doing it on behalf of residents, like a residents association. But you have to fit that criteria.
But look, the rest of us, we're out and about for a wee bit now. So, someone, it could be a proxy for a contractor by another name, but of course he or she's not going to reveal that that in fact's the case.
Well, you're going to have locus standi to bring the judicial review in the first place. Otherwise, you can't bring the judicial review.
No, local standing is what?
Well, the court will decide whether or not you've got a valid interest in your application.
No, sorry, I'm not being pernickety here. But the interest, as we have often found out, the interest as presented may not be, in fact, the actual interest.
Well, that's a matter for the courts.
Is there, Joe, do we know, is there then a testing of that so that the court is satisfied that individual X is not being used as a front for commercial?
There's lots and lots of case law. For example, there's quite prominent case law about whether, for example, the Human Rights Commission has got locus standi to bring a judicial review. So there's lots and lots of case law on that. And people will be advised before they bring their judicial review whether or not they've got standing to do it.
Yeah.
Just on the other question then, you said that the judge then, or the court, has the barriers to set the limit or the cost up to that cap. When is that set? Is that set at the start of proceedings or at the end of proceedings when a court case has been exhausted?
When you bring your application for judicial review, you have to state whether or not you want these regulations to apply, so then all parties are aware.
Yes.
And then the other side can dispute whether or not they think you're actually entitled to the protection under the convention, so there's provision for that.
Okay, thank you.
Linda?
It's okay. I was just going to make the point that we're not going to be able to change the policy around who's going to be able to bring this case. It's literally around the cap, so I think that the flexibility probably is important in terms of that it's going to more likely be of assistance to people who are on the lower end of the scale in terms of affordability, but if a very genuine case, a contractor trying to outdo another contractor is going to say £5,000 not big money in the grand scheme of things, you know. So I think it's probably more likely in the balance to impact those who are less well off. Okay, members. Pat?
Just one, I might have missed it earlier. What's the status of this convention in the event of Brexit?
It's an interesting one because the UK is a member in its own right, and the EU is also a member in its own right, so it will continue to apply.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, members satisfied then? Joe, thank you.
Thank you.
You handled that very well.
Very good.
Thanks.
Okay, members, I'll put the question formally that the Committee for Justice considered SR 2017/27, the Costs Protection Irish Convention Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2017, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objection for the rule. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, members. Item 17, page 249 to 272 of your meeting pack. This rule amends the PSNI and PSNI Reserve Injury Benefit Regulations to reflect the replacement of incapacity benefit by employment support allowance, and enables PSNI pension branch to deduct ESA from an injury on duty pension on a point-forward basis, ensuring recipients do not receive duplicate payments for the same injury. The rule is subject to negative resolution. Previous committee agreed that it was content for the department to make the rule. The department has confirmed that there's been no policy change since the SL1 was submitted to the previous committee. And if members are content with the rule, subject again to the findings of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, I'll move to put the question. Patsy?
Chair, the only question I would have, I thought that was the law anyway. Well, that if you were getting ESA paid to you and getting another pension, that you had to declare the ESA and or incapacity benefit anyway.
It has been obviously been operating for the past couple of years, but there was an issue with PSNI that it hadn't been applied whenever ESA changes came in. That was identified, and therefore they had to introduce this provision to address that issue.
So forgive me for pursuing this, so the ESA regulations didn't apply to the PSNI pensions?
My understanding that there was an issue in respect of that, yeah. Officials are here, if you want to probe it more, they're here.
I think it'd be useful to hear that, because
Yeah.
it applies to any other pensions. So,
Okay. Andrea and Ellen, thank you. Or, Andrina, sorry, I think I called you
Alright,
Andrea.
okay.
Apologies.
No problem.
If you want to just explain then why this was necessary?
Sorry, it was back in 2017. I wasn't in the department at the time, so forgive me just for not being completely up to it. It was the result of a claim being brought to the Ombudsman, and it turned out that the deductions were made for incapacity benefit, but incapacity benefit was replaced by the employment, replaced by ESA, but the PSNI were continuing to deduct. But the regulations said it was only incapacity benefit they were deduct, and it needed just to be changed to say ESA to be deducted.
well, I'm just looking at the actual regulations themselves here, and it said if you exceed £85 a week, your pension exceeds £85 a week, that then the issue should be regularised. So I'm wondering why a PSNI pension or payment or whatever it might be should be different from anybody else's.
This wasn't a pension, but this is an injury and duty award.
Well, sorry, a pension or whatever it is. Aye.
And I think the regulations at the time, the injury benefit regulations at the time, provided that they could take deductions for incapacity benefit, but they needed to be amended when ESA was introduced, and they weren't amended.
Well done. All right.
And a officer took a case to the Pensions Ombudsman on that basis to say they were taking unlawful deductions because they were taking them for incapacity and they didn't have the legal authorities to take them for ESA. So the police injury benefit regulations needed to be changed to rectify that, so that they could take lawful deductions.
Oh, no, I'm getting where you're coming from. Did this result in significant overpayments, did it then?
Well, it did, yes. And the policing board at the time took a decision. I think it was in the region of the Pensions Ombudsman ruled in favour of the actual officer and said that they should be given payments back because they were taken unlawfully. So it was in the region at the time, and I think the board did receive briefing that it was about £3 million was paid back to officers over the course of that time.
So this allows that so in other words, the Ombudsman's decision which found in favour of that person, this regularises the law now, so that in fact that decision can no longer apply. Is that what you're saying?
No, it allows them now to take lawful deductions for ESA.
That's what I mean. The decision of the Ombudsman found in favour of the appellant.
Yes.
So this now changes that. The law is regularised now. So if there were to be somebody take a case now with this law regularised, they wouldn't win it. That's essentially it. On the same grounds, right?
And it's actually sorry, the decision was made that it was made from this point forward, so it wasn't made retrospectively. If it had been made retrospectively, then
Right, okay.
there wouldn't have been that amount having to be paid back. But because it was from this point forward, then that's why the money had to be paid back. So.
Okay. All right, yeah.
Paul?
So thank you, Chair. So to be clear, when this is passed, it seems to be a wordplay that this guy has won his case on. So obviously then he's been a trailblazer for every other person in that position, whereby there's been an injury at work and then obviously claiming employment support allowance. This now closes that loophole, if you like. So when does it start to have effect? Is it when this goes through the assembly? This is a negative resolution, I think. So it's from when it goes through the process, whenever that will be. So for those people who are getting no deductions from their pension because they're claiming ESA, will they then be notified from now on you will have to get deduction from your pension or your ESA? because of your pension, or is there any are they untouchable, those individuals?
I don't actually know the answer to that. We're going to have to, if members are happy, if we try and find that out for you.
My understanding is this change has already happened.
Yeah.
What we're,
okay.
so what we're talking about, as with the previous statutory rules, would be if we decided to do it differently, then there would be
A change.
a change. But this has been already implemented, so these deductions have already happened. So there hasn't been in effect the double payment taking place from, I think, whenever it was introduced, 2017.
Yeah, yeah. So at that point then, in 2017, the change would have been made, and you would assume then that all those people who were enjoying that would have been notified, and their payments then changed from that point on.
Yeah.
Their payment would be reduced, or they wouldn't get
Yes.
a ESA.
Yeah, well, the deductions.
They would get deductions.
Yes.
They're getting a ESA.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not just new entrants, it's people who have been enjoying
Yes.
the court case decision.
Well, yeah, but we'll double check.
Double check that, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Linda? Sorry.
No, I think it was just to make the point that you were making. It's
yeah.
already in place, and it's deductions out of the injury and duty, and it couldn't be done retrospectively because
No, of course not.
of the fact that it wasn't the individual's fault.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
the fault was that of the department of not changing the type of benefit that they should have been deducting from incapacity to ESA.
I apologise, it's just that I forgot about the time lapse.
Just to clarify, then it's 3.2 million up to, is that right? Am I wrong? The cost?
Yes.
Yeah, over the course of the period from the incapacity benefit change to ESA.
Yeah, so that's the cost.
Yeah. That's the figure that's already been lost, so to speak.
It's paid back to you, obviously.
England and Wales didn't apply it retrospectively. I think Scotland did, as far as I understand it.
Is that accurate, that figure, or is it still?
It was accurate as of the date that the regulations were made,
Changed.
yes. Yes, and I interpreted that.
17? Yeah, that was an estimate then. At the time this was drawn up, I take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't know the actual cost then?
Again, we can come back to you on that and the actual cost, yeah.
Right, okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, members? Okay, well, thank you for that, and then I will put the formal question to members. That the Committee for Justice considered SR 2017/36, the Police Service of Northern Ireland and Police Service of Northern Ireland Reserve Injury Benefit Amendment Regulations 2017, and subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, has no objection to the rule. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, item 18, the Draft Committee Forward Work Programme. It's there in members' pack 274 to 279. And there will be 2 additional meetings to deal with the backlog on statutory rules, and that will take place next Tuesday, the 28th of January, and also the following Tuesday, the 4th of February. There is another meeting anticipated if that's necessary. The Attorney-General has also confirmed that he'll be attending the committee meeting on Thursday, the 30th of January next week, and that's to deal with the statutory rules that has been laid by that office, and also to have a wider conversation with him around the criminal justice system. So it's just there for members to note in terms of the forward work programme. Obviously there's a degree of flexibility in that, but we're seeking to get meetings with the prison service, with the Chief Constable for the police service, and other organisations, and the Minister will then be coming near the end of February, where once we're in a clear context around the pressures facing the department, we'll be able to have a more focused meeting with the Minister. Okay, so we'll note the forward work programme. Correspondence at item 19, pages 281 to 304. Just to draw members' attention to items 1 and 2. It's just to seek agreement to the requests, seek agreement to request updates from the Department in respect of the recommendations that were contained in the Northern Ireland Audit Office reports on speeding up justice, avoidable delay in the criminal justice system, and mental health in the criminal justice system. If members are agreed, we'll seek those requests in those areas, and then that will come back to us in due course. The other item of correspondence, item 7, and Linda Dillon touched on this earlier with the Permanent Secretary in regards to the historical child sexual abuse cases in Fermanagh, that we would seek an update from the department in respect of the issues that were discussed earlier by Linda in the earlier part of the meeting. So if members are content, we'll request an overview of the current position, including the number of cases that are being investigated and the likely time frame. Obviously, the department will need to deal with the different aspects of the criminal justice system that are handling that. So if members are content with that approach, we'll proceed on that basis, and also to note the rest of the correspondence and how they'll be dealt with.
Great. Okay.
Okay. Chairman's business. I've an invite from the Attorney General, as has the Deputy Chair, to speak to his Living Law event on the 6th of February, where he brings young people here. I intend to do that. I think Linda's hoping to do that as well, if she's available. Also, I've been given an invite to go to the PSNI Student Officer Recruitment Campaign launch, which, subject to Assembly business and this committee's business, I will try to attend. Item 21, any other business? I've no doubt that in future there'll be issues raised under AOB, usually is. Next meeting then will take place on Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. and it'll be in this room. And then on the Thursday there will be the normal meeting of the committee at 2 o'clock in this room. Members are content, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.